Ladies and gentlemen, Matthew Rankin. William Lyon Mackenzie King, an admittedly very strange dude. So tell us the genesis of this amazing film.
Yeah, well, as the Ottawa chapter of the Mackenzie King fan club knows, Mackenzie King was a compulsive diarist. He kept a diary his entire life, from the age of 18 until like 3 days before his death, and it's something like a 800,000 page tome. And I, too, am a compulsive diarist, and I was really interested that this document existed, that it hadn't been just, lost to the mists of time, and you could go read it. And so I went to read it, and I was really interested in reading what he was writing in his diary at the same age I was at that time, in my 20s. And I was really struck by how much of his writing was devoted to very maudlin outbursts and melodramatic outpourings and self-pity and bargain hunting triumphs, and it just reminded me so much of my own diary that I had an immediate connection with it, and in it I saw just sort of an opportunity to also kind of like take the piss out of Canadian image making and sort of I don't know how to say this in English, but la mise en image de la nation, and this kind of thing. So that was sort of the genesis of it.
So you started writing a treatment, sort of like, I know, I can make a feature film about Mackenzie King, and it'll be involving ejaculating cacti. There'll be foot fetishes and footwear stuff. So, you might have embroidered a little bit on those journals.
No, it's all completely factual. There is a debate between historians as to whether or not Bert Harper was in fact skewered by a narwhal. I believe that he was. I believe the research indicates. No, I sort of read it. I would read it, and he speaks, just, it's a copious document. And often when I was in the microfiche reading it, I would sort of fall asleep. And then the librarian would wake me up at the end of the night, and I'd realize that I hadn't really read too much, and then I couldn't really remember if what I had retained was something I dreamed or something that I'd actually read. And so the two kind of fused. But that, to me, sort of made sense, because I do think of a diary as like not really a strict, purely fact-based historical document. It's a very subjective account. And I think of a diary, certainly my own, I think of it as like a parallel consciousness to whatever's happening in the real world. So that was sort of, I felt like in a way that's a bizarrely sort of accurate depiction of the diary. The idea is to sort of get into the subconscious of the person.
Were there Ouija boards involved, or in any way? We know that Mackenzie King was famous for attempting to commune with the spirits of the dead and etc.
Yeah, he was an early ectoplasm enthusiast, and at this point in his life, he's not into ectoplasm. He's not, trying to commune with the ghost of his mother or his dog or Prime Minister Gladstone or whatever. That came later, but I do think that that emerged in a very large extent out of his solitude. He was a sort of a person who spent like kind of too much of his time by himself. And the diary is sort of a monument to that in a way. So you could think of it as the origin story of his interest in ectoplasm.
In your incredibly evocative and stylish use of animation and cutout sets, it's so beautifully rendered and at once kind of disturbing, but also beautifully poetic. And when you decided to do the very kind of amazing animation side of it, was that always part of the idea of doing this film, would be to merge those cinematic styles?
Yeah, like this film really belongs to a kind of parallel focus or a parallel tradition in filmmaking. I feel like normally when we make a film, we want to hide the artifice of it. The point of making a film is to create a simulacrum of reality, which is so credible that it's so irresistible that everyone will believe it and they'll forget that it's just a movie. This movie takes a very different approach, and it is trying to really kind of embrace artifice and kind of open up new modes of storytelling through embracing that artifice. It's also trying to make an aesthetic virtue out of my Dollarama-sized budget. I knew that if I tried to sort of go for Spielbergian-style gloss, my budget would just drain into a sewer within an afternoon. But if I took, if I sort of embraced a more theatrical tradition and kind of worked in the tradition of, I think of like Karel Zeman and Lotte Reiniger and, the early films of Lars von Trier and Guy Madden, of course, John Pays, these filmmakers who were able to work on an epic scale with very tiny budgets by kind of embracing a more theatrical approach to image making and defying the simulacrum of cinematic realism. That was sort of something that my budget imposed, but that is not really like enough for a movie. Like, I'm a big believer that the form has to kind of incarnate the function, and in there, I think, is something that's kind of exciting for me. Is that the movie is very much about construction of nationalism, construction of nationalist iconographies, and I really wanted the viewer to be kind of confronted by that artifice all the way through. So I wanted the form to kind of incarnate the constructed nature of nationhood. And also, I also think that's like an interesting approach to the biopic, justement. Like I remember I had a professor in university who, in history, who devoted an entire lecture to Leonardo DiCaprio's teeth in Titanic. And she was like, there's just no way that a poor person in 1912 would have beautiful teeth like that. His teeth would be rotten, they'd be, all messed up. And she was like livid that, this historical error had taken place. And I have a lot of respect for that and a lot of room for that. But that's sort of what a historian has trouble with, I think, with a historical movie. And again, it's a problem of like the simulacrum of cinematic realism, right? Like maybe James Cameron was like, okay, like I get it. The teeth would be rotten, but my romantic plot isn't gonna work if Leo has like rotten teeth, right? So maybe he'd like decided he was gonna like step in and make this artistic, dentistry operation. just as like, for the sake, you always have to change things. Like, no matter what, what that story underscores for me is that like, no matter what, when we transform some factual historical process into a film, there are artistic operations which will transform it and will change it and will make it different from reality, which is, a very separate process. We are not stenographers, right? We're not chartered accountants. We have to make these artistic decisions. So this movie is, really, really embracing artifice on a very grand scale, and it really leaves people with this question at the end, like how much of this is real and how much of it is false. And I think that's actually kind of a good tension for a viewer to have when they watch a historical film.
Anybody have any questions for Matt or comments? Yes, over here.
Thank you very much. Very entertaining and engaging. I'm an Atlantic Canadian, and my view on so-called Canadian history is that, and Canada, is we were an eternal adolescent. A country that took, more than 100 years to repatriate its constitution, or almost 100 years to decide on a flag, or like a national anthem. And so watching this, I'm encouraged, but also discouraged in the sense of, I spend a lot of time with historians and, bantering back and forth, among our many communities. And, you use the word image de la nation. I don't think we even use the word in English anymore in a serious way, what a nation is. I spent a few years ago in Spain. I said, Spain, it's like Catalan. It's a nation looking for a country. And Spain, I said, it's a country looking for a nation. And I think we would say the same thing about Canada. And the idea of one nation, I think maybe it's passé.
Of course.
We are nations of nations or communities of nations, etc.
Yes.
But I say bravo, but how can we scale it up, and pass beyond kind of like, questioning is this real or not real, which is not really the question. When are we going to grow up, I think is the question.
Yeah, Matt, when? Come on.
That is a good question. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's I obviously I can't answer that. But I think that is interesting. I mean, I do think that like it's. I mean, I don't think of this. I think this is a movie that sort of is very skeptical about nationhood. It is trying to sort of, it's not part of a kind of Heritage Minute style patriotic fresco. It is trying to sort of undermine and destabilize and even subvert these images that we've created, which I think it's true have been created sort of by committees and subcommittees and subcommittees and so forth. But I mean, that is sort of what Mackenzie King represents, I think. Like, I think he did sort of devise the recipe on the radical center. if the sort of radical moderation, which is a recipe that a lot of politicians have attempted to emulate following him, in large part because he was prime minister for so long, longer than anyone, right? Almost 22 years. So, but I mean, the greatest sort of artistic depiction of that, I think, is Frank Scott, the poet who wrote this poem about Mackenzie King in the 1950s after his death, and the final stanza of that is, let us raise up a cult, let us raise up a temple to the cult of mediocrity, do nothing by halves that can be done by quarters. And that's still sort of, kind of relevant today, right? In a lot of ways. But I mean, it's a movie that is sort of questioning like the value of the center. Like on one level, the center, you sort of think like positively, we could think, well, the center is nice because it sort of takes the, position that there's many legitimate options in a democratic community, that there's many ways that we can look at a thing, and we have to sort of, politics involves reconciliation, and, nobody really gets their ideal scenario, but they don't get their worst scenario either, and we just sort of figure this out right here in the center, right? So that might be a nice way of thinking about centrism. But you could also think of centrism as a total abdication of leadership, as a total, opportunistic position to take, and and even a position that might be hiding something much more nefarious and insidious. Mackenzie King is certainly a politician who walked a very, very fine line between the utopia and the nightmare of his era, and so that is sort of what the film is kind of exploring.
Anybody else? Yeah, over here.
What do you got against Winnipeg, man?
I don't have anything against Winnipeg. I love Winnipeg, and I would ask you the same question. In fact, I don't think there's anything anti-Winnipeg about this movie at all. I think it's a celebration of Winnipeg's countercultural defiance, and it's the Winnipeg that I love. There are other visions of Winnipeg which might be more corporate, might be more vanilla ice cream. Maybe you want to visit the Forks. There's some nice museums you could check out. But the Winnipeg I love is a Winnipeg that's really radical, punk rock, in the trenches. Winnipeg's highest peak is in fact, it previously was the town garbage dump, and it was turned into a park in the 1960s. And it's called Garbage Hill. And so the Winnipeg of this film is sort of a tribute to Garbage Hill. It's like this civilization built out of garbage, right?
Yeah. Go Jets. By the way, Matt made it one of the best documentaries you'll ever see about the Winnipeg Jets, but the first iteration of that hockey team. But I digress. We digress to Winnipeg. Any other questions or comments at the back? Sorry, at the very back, and then you're next. You're next. Okay, go ahead. Yep.
What is your thought process with regards to the symbolism regarding the cacti? Like, not only just the ejaculating cactus, but like the man with the cactus hand?
Yeah. I did a lot of research, if you can believe it, into anti-masturbation technology of the late 19th century. And a lot of these, interestingly, a lot of these devices were invented in France, and they all really did exist. Every anti-masturbation contraption you see in this film, as far-fetched as they might seem, they did factually, and I swear it, they really did exist. So there was a harness that would like electrocute you if you had an erection, and there was, there was like the Kellogg, the Kellogg's cornflakes, right? Which he had like this big like obsession with yogurt enemas. He believed that if you like flooded your system with yogurt, you wouldn't masturbate. And he also invented cornflakes for that purpose. It was the idea that if you ate a very bland foodstuff, you wouldn't masturbate. It does work, actually. And then my favorite one was a device in France called a cactus skin glove. And it wasn't made out of actual, an actual cactus. It was like this really kind of weird sort of S&M leather glove, but it had like little prickles on it. And you would wear this at night so that, you would not give in to temptation. And so
They're on sale in the lobby, actually.
So that's where the cactus came from.
Okay, well, Winnipeg, masturbation, we're getting somewhere tonight. Yes, you had your hand up earlier.
The ceremonial guard that they spoke, their mask, is that like a nod to their mummers, or is that just coincidental?
I would love to say yes, but really that was a choice because we had to. We had so many problems with budget and stuff. It's literally almost everyone who made the film at some point plays one of those guards. So we just thought it would be easy if they all wore masks, and then they'd be identical. But I sort of like that. I like the idea of like masked RCMP. It's creepy.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to comment that I really enjoyed the whole aesthetic and a lot of the choices you made in terms of how the whole film kind of harkens back to World War II era propaganda and a lot of propaganda type cartoons, as well as just like the way everyone was dressed and iconography there. I love Rudy's little crown, like to represent that she was originally from England, the crown braid. That was really clever. I just really enjoyed a lot of the iconography and all the like little stuff hidden out throughout the film. That's it.
Great, thank you.
You're here, and then you're that one, two, and then three.
You obviously very much enjoyed playing with gender in the film, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about those choices.
Yeah. That's great. That's something that people remark upon, and I love that. It's not something I thought about too. I didn't really think about it too much while we were casting. My whole thing was I just wanted to cast the right sort of person for the role, kind of irrespective of whatever demographic they were. And sometimes that involved a certain amount of drag, and that was just, sort of fun. Originally, Philippe Falardeau, the great Quebec director, was going to play J. Israel Tart, but he had to back out because he had to shoot something, and then then Annie Saint-Pierre, who's also a great filmmaker and my very good friend, I was like, well, she would be even better. So that was great. And then we did this test with a mustache, and I was like, oh, I love this. This is so great. And then when I was writing the script, I really wanted Donald Sutherland to play Mackenzie King's mother. But I forget it. That would never happen. So, but then when I was sort of still thinking about it, I started thinking about Louis Negan, who's my good friend, and then at a certain point I was doing the storyboard, and I realized that I was no longer drawing Donald Sutherland. I was drawing Louis, and then Louis just sort of took over in my brain as like, even better and stuff. So anyway, but these are just people who were like very well suited to the part that they were playing. And same with Emmanuel Schwartz, and when we did the casting, we made it very, very open to everybody. I really wanted it to be like a school play, like in your school play you can have, your transgender artful dodger, and this is just totally normal. And and this is actually kind of true of theater writ large. It's something that it's not something that we question so much in theater, but in film we really do. And I think again it comes back to the tyranny of cinematic realism and that simulacrum. And what I like about that, what I like about the question that a movie like this raises is that I think it sort of underscores the kind of bias at work in that simulacrum, and maybe we're not as well served by it as we might think, right? So, anyway, so that's sort of what I was thinking about. But it really, really did come back to just choosing the right person for the role.
Yep, over here.
Yeah, thank you. I think I found myself laughing the hardest at a lot of the place jokes you were making. Kind of how you collapsed Canada into like a few very like distinct place names that were sort of very, very far apart. Was that kind of like an in-joke thing? Did you have a sort of map in your head about what you were trying to say there, or was it just sort of spontaneous humor around like the Baroness of Mississauga?
Yeah, well, that's a joke that gets a laugh here, and and the other joke that gets a laugh in Canada is "Welcome to Winnipeg," whereas elsewhere in the world they're like, "Oh, well, obviously that's Winnipeg." Obviously that the Baroness of Mississauga, of course. But those are kind of like the two. Those are kind of like the two regional jokes that kind of are sort of. I think they're really the only two in jokes. There's other things that you might see more of if you have some knowledge. I mean, I was trying to play with like, again, the kind of images we make of ourselves, like sort of the way these places try to sort of se mettre en image, like to how do you say this, Tom? Like to put yourself in an image, to image make yourself. Huh? Yeah, to present themselves, exactly. So, beautiful British Columbia becomes this clear-cut, Winnipeg with all of its, efforts and touristic efforts to like present as a normal city becomes the weirdest place on earth. And then Quebec, of course, becomes like a hall of mirrors. Because of course in Quebec we like to sort of, look at ourselves very closely. So it's sort of playing a little bit with some of how these how we kind of like present, but yeah, I didn't really go too far down that line. Again, I feel like it's sort of a vision of Canada on Mars. So even Canadian audiences are kind of figuring it out, just like everybody else for the most part.
Yes, at the back, you had your hand up, and then this gentleman over here. Yeah, with the blue mask. Yeah, that's you, and then the black mask is next.
Just going off what you just said there, you're talking a lot about imagery and like the use of imagery throughout the movie. Was that like a very conscious thing that you were trying to do to kind of create like a certain image of Canada by like to external audiences outside of Canada, in like a way of like sort of prideful but also not prideful of Canada? I'm thinking a lot about how you mentioned Guy Madden earlier. You did My Big Winnipeg, and there's a lot of stuff of like a love-hate relationship with this city. Is that a similar thing with the country of Canada you're finding when making this, or?
Well, I think of the movie as a real piss take. I don't think it's a prideful movie at all. And in fact, I've received a certain amount of blowback from some wounded patriots who were actually really pissed off. So I don't think it really plays as patriotism. I tried to make a Canadian Heritage Minute one time, and I was a miserable failure. Like all the ideas I pitched them were completely wrong. I wanted to make like an interpretive dance film about Ben Johnson, the sprinter. Anyway, I'm really interested in like shame and this kind of thing. I mean, that's just personal. That's personally shame is kind of my specialty, just as a person. So yeah, I can't really get into like patriotism or anything like that. But I do love those iconographies. Like I think those iconographies are kind of amazing. Like I would say if there's any one big system of influence on the images in the movie, I would say Expo 67. Like those Expo 67 pavilions are incredible. Particularly the pulp and paper pavilion. That's my favorite one. And it's just amazing that there was like a pulp and paper pavilion. Like that's so bureaucratic and Canadian, kind of, to just to think, well, we'll have a pulp and paper. We gotta have a pulp and paper pavilion. Anyway, so yeah, but I like that. I like how the spaces which are metaphysical are given this kind of architectural form by the pavilions of Expo 67, and so I was kind of like riffing on that.
My question is, I guess more generally, well, this film, as Tom explained, was finished a few years ago. So I was wondering just what you've been up to since then, and what you're working on now, and more generally, how you, since this, as I understand, was your first feature film, how that was for you, and more generally, with the state of filmmaking in Canada, where do you see things from your perspective as a, let's say, a unique filmmaker? I don't know how to categorize you, but like, you know, you're making your own sort of handmade films, and how is your outlook on that? And yeah.
Yeah, well, I guess, you know, I'm juggling lots of different things. I mean, of course, as we all have been, we've all been sort of on this protracted COVID pause. And so, you know, that has slowed everything down. But I am supposed to make a film about the Esperanto World Congress in Montreal this coming summer. For any Esperantists in the room, the Esperanto World Congress will be held in Montreal this August for the first time. So I sort of have this bizarre relationship with the Esperanto movement, and they invited me to go and film there. So I'm going to make like a sort of a fictitious documentary about Esperanto. I just love failed utopias. So so I'm gonna do that, and then yeah, I got, you know, I'm like writing some scripts and stuff like that. I mean, it's hard I mean, it's always hard to make films, and I feel actually really fortunate that I live in Quebec, which is, you know, makes a lot of space for personal filmmaking, which is not true of where I'm from in Winnipeg. As much as Winnipeg has an amazing art scene, and artists that I love who live and work there and do incredible work, the culture writ large does not really support that so much. It's very much a countercultural movement, which is part of its genius and part of why it's great. But also it becomes tricky, you know, like people can, you know, really become embittered fast and exhausted and this kind of thing. So I feel fortunate that I get to work in Quebec that has a lot of concern for really encouraging culture. Like culture is really kind of a value in Quebec, and so yeah, I don't know if does that answer the question? Okay.
Well, I just want to thank Matt for revealing to us the importance of not taking a selfie with a bear in the vicinity. And a lot of great advice before the great advice of the 20th century. And in all seriousness, thank you, Matt Rankin, for being with us and showing this amazing film to us at IFO. Matthew Rankin.
Thank you.